Hi, thank you for tuning in today. My name's Kayleen White. I've got a presentation, Finding the Greatest Global Need, which I hope will be of some interest or use to everybody who's listening. Unfortunately, I have a lot of unstable internet connections where I live, so this will be a pre-recorded presentation. And I'll begin with a little bit about myself. I'm an Australian. I'm retired now. Officially, I've been referring to myself as a pagan for around about 3 decades now, but I've been living in a way that had fairly strong pagan elements before then, including doing rituals, interest in things like crystals, very strong interest in nature. I'm not particularly well known. I used to run small local workshops, and I've been a blogger for about 2 decades. I've also explored quite a few other spiritual paths, for example, Buddhism as a teenager and in my 20s. And I've also been interested in various forms of alternative healing, mostly what I term channeled energy healing, which I learned from a spiritualist church in the 1980s. And again, I'm an Australian, so I'll be using Australian spelling. We moved to the current place that we're living late last year, and it is the only place that I have ever lived in Australia in my nearly 7 decades where we have roos visiting across the road in a vacant block of land. So I just sort of chuck in a photo there for your entertainment. Since around about 2014, I've made roughly weekly blog posts which were based on doing an assessment of energy around the world, and those assessments were aimed at determining where the greatest need for energetic work, healing, etc. is around the world or several places. In this presentation, I'm going to cover what led me to doing that, the key details of the concept, and a few extra general comments. In terms of the significance of finding out where the greatest need is, I'd like to illustrate that with an analogy. When I learned what I term channeled energy healing at a spiritualist group in the 80s, I was taught that the healing energy would eventually get to wherever it was needed, no matter where it was put in. So say, for example, the patient has a sore toe and you put healing in at the top of their head. Eventually the healing energy will get down to the toe and it'll do some healing along the way. However, if you put the energy in at the toe, the total amount of energy that you need to put in is probably going to be less, although you won't be meeting the other needs. But the patient will receive the benefit of that healing much more quickly. And the other benefit is that you're being efficient by not draining your energy as much. That means that you can use the extra remaining vim and vigor that you have to do more healing elsewhere. You could perhaps go and heal directly on the other places that are needed. It also means that you're going to be more likely to be able to keep going with this sort of work. It won't have as much of an impact on you, your life, and your loved ones. In terms of putting energy into the planet, firstly, I consider the planet to be a highly interconnected energy system. Personally, I like the term Gaia, but I understand other people may not, and other people can disagree with anything in its presentation. That's fine. The other aspect that goes with that is that people can affect places and places can affect people. People will go to power spots so that they can feel healed or get some insight, for example. At other times, there are places that people describe as being haunted or unpleasant, so they avoid those places. People can also affect places. So some of those hauntings, for example, or unpleasant places are as a result of what humans have done in those particular places. But in addition, there are rituals that are done by First Peoples around the world in particular, which have the view of looking after the energy system of the planet or their part of the planet. And this is particularly the case here in Australia. So the planet has an energy system, a complex energy system, as do people. Now, if we look at that from the point of view of health and well-being, if there's a problem like a blockage in a human's energy system, that can cause pain or something not to work well, and it needs to have attention. If there's a problem with the planet's energy system, similarly, that will have an impact on the energetic well-being of the planet, and that may impact how people feel, as I've mentioned, but also perhaps the characteristic energy and life and well-being of all forms of life there. The other side of that coin is that if there's a particular strength, that can also have a positive or beneficial effect. Say, for example, somebody has a very strong heart chakra, then the energy radiating from that will be of benefit to them and perhaps to other people. I've already mentioned power places in the Earth's energetic system, so basically that's an example of where there's a particular strength, that's going to have a positive impact throughout the rest of the planet to some extent, and on the life that goes there or is near there or is energetically connected to that particular place. So it should be noted that the impact of sentient life, to be clear, mainly humans, can be either beneficial or harmful, and it can be deliberate or, less effectively, unintended. In terms of assessing energy, I use a quantitative system, which means I apply a number. So if I have one region that has, say, 2 units of whatever energy and the other one nearby has 3, I know that the one that has 3 will have a greater impact, and I know how much it would be. It's also possible to use qualitative descriptions such as good, very good, etc. I'm just used to using numbers, so that's the system I use, but I'm happy for other people, if they do this, to use the good, very good, etc. sort of approach. The other thing that I do here is that I don't actually just come up with a single overall number. This is an approach that to some extent I learned about through human resources at work, where you might have a workplace, for example, where everybody's happy about the pay, but unhappy about the hours that they work, whether it's because they're being overworked or they're not getting enough hours, so they're not getting enough of the good pay rate. If somebody was just taking in a single overall number and saw that the workers were overall unhappy, they might, in that circumstance, try increasing pay, and they'd find that it doesn't result in an improvement because they're not getting the extra information they need, which is that pay's not the issue, hours of work are the issue. In terms of energy, I don't like using good or bad. I think that's got a lot of baggage in it and problems with definitions, etc. In my work, I use the terms balance positive, which I extend to balance positive and spiritually mature, which I abbreviate down to BPM, and the opposite, which is unbalanced or immature or both. To explain that fully would just about need another presentation. So for this presentation for today, I'm going to simplify that all down to beneficial and harmful, although I'll probably slip into using BPM or balance positive, balance and unbalanced from time to time. The thing about that is that both can occur at the same time, and in the work that I do, I examine both so that I can see what's got relatively stronger significance in terms of beneficial and harmful. If there's an area where there's perhaps a balance between those, but the overall numbers of both are lower than a nearby area that's also got balanced, but a higher strength of beneficial than harmful, then I know that that area is more significant and is something that I need to focus on. This is the last how I got here slide before I get into the details of what I actually do. As a teenager in the 1970s, I came across the concept that a small group of people meditating together with a suitable shared focus and skill and intent could have an influence on others. And I was particularly interested that that could be a beneficial influence. It could also be the opposite, but I'll stick with the beneficial because that's what interested me. I learned a little bit more about that in the 80s and 90s, and in particular I read about the work that was done by Dion Fortune during World War II, where she and her students did a regular series of meditations aimed at helping the Allied forces. There's a book edited by Gareth Knight which includes examples of the weekly and then later monthly letters that Dion Fortune sent out directing that sort of work. I also read that a South Asian Swami had claimed to strengthen Russian resistance during the Battle of Stalingrad through meditation. Furthermore, since then, I have come across various attempts at, I guess you'd say, scientific evidence to prove that such influences can occur. And I've given a few links below in the slide. And I should also mention what's called the Global Consciousness Project, where there were a number of random generators scattered around the planet, and through various mathematics that I'm not going to pretend to understand or be able to explain, they looked for and found evidence that some events had an impact on mass consciousness, and in some cases the consciousness started to change before the event. So there's an indication that there is a certain amount of linkage across the planet with these large impactful events. That has now, I think, been taken over by the Heart Math Institute, and I found the new website a little bit less easy to use, but it's something that's worth keeping in mind. For me, that concept of being able to use meditation to do good resonated very strongly. It's something that has been a key part of what I've done in terms of, let's call it spiritual or psychic work, since the 1970s. And particularly in this century, I have become far more interested in developing and using that for various forms of group work to make the world a better place. That actually started in the 80s with one of the groups I was in, but that interest has led to me getting to where I am now and to this presentation today. So in terms of the actual practical actions that I use, I dowse with a pendulum and a map. These days I use a digital map. I used to originally use a paper map, and I found it worked as well digitally for me. May not for everyone, and it may only have worked for me because I used a paper map before for quite a few years. I record the results for each region in a spreadsheet, do a few additional calculations, then draw it up on a contour. In the documentation you're about to see, BPM stands for Balanced, Positive, Spiritually Mature, which is what I'm referring to as beneficial in this presentation. Non-BPM is the opposite, unbalanced and or immature, or in the terms I'm using for this presentation, harmful. This is an example spreadsheet. You can see I've got the regions shown over here in the left column. This column represents or records the balanced energy assessments I made. These are the non-balanced energies. Over here we've got the net effect, so you can see we have more balanced than unbalanced energy. So Bandayan, also known as Australia, has a net positive of 1. Other areas have more are stronger in the balanced energies that they have. Some areas, the non-balanced energy is stronger than the balanced energy. I would interpret that as they need more healing or positive energy sent to them. I also do calculations of the net overall average, but on the basis of area and population. So in this case we can see that there is more balanced energy by area than non-balanced, but there is less balanced energy than unbalanced on the basis of population, which tells me that the world's population overall is a little bit more negative than positive. As already mentioned, I take those results and I draw them up as contours, or I should say I generally draw them up as contours. Of late I haven't always done that because I'm so used to it I don't necessarily need to see them as contours. I can look at the spreadsheet and make some decisions on the basis of that. And as I've already mentioned, I do some additional analysis as well. This is an example of one of the maps that I prepare. So in this case, this is a strong area of balanced energy with 10, shown with a thicker border, and I use purple for personal preference. 10 here. As the areas get less strongly BPM, the borders are shown in thinner lines, and so are the numbers. So you can see here there's less balanced energy in East Asia than there is in Central America or the Southern Ocean. Similarly, with the unbalanced energies, you can see there's a relatively strong concentration of unbalanced energy in Northern Asia or Africa, and South and mainland Southeast Asia, whereas that influence is less strong in this particular case in Europe. So looking at this, I can see that this area has an excess of balanced energy, as does this. So that would be a good area to start building up energy that I can then use to send to other areas such as Africa or East Asia or Southeast Asia. Sadly, nothing's perfect, and that includes this. The main problem for me is that by just looking at large regions, that's not accurate enough to pick up small concentrated areas that may need more help or may be a source of positive or BPM energy. To get around that, sometimes I've actually used this technique on smaller, more specific areas, for example, Northern Asia or Africa, or other areas where something may be going on in terms of world events where it may be useful to focus the energy more specifically. It's worth noting that oceans are a very important part of this, and one of the things I've noticed is that the natural energy in the Southern Ocean is often more strongly balanced in winter than in summer. In winter there tends to be more currents bringing upwellings bringing nutrients, I suspect. I'm looking at this purely in terms of what's happening on the planet, but I have to note that we exist in a solar system and a universe, so there's no doubt other systems off the planet which are significant in terms of changes to regions. Changes of mass consciousness, such as major news events or major disasters, will have an influence. That to some extent will be picked up by this, but if there's something similar in terms of what's happening off the planet, astrological influences, for example, that won't be picked up with this. I haven't tried using this for off the planet systems, and I don't think I can work out quite how to do that, but anyway. The other significant issue here is that dowsing is something I'm comfortable with, other people aren't. I have, however, seen people use tarot to make specific numeric determinations about the strengths of issues, so I'm fairly confident that there's probably other systems that could be used for this, and that's actually one of the main reasons I'm doing the presentation, is to see if somebody else can come up with other systems that suit other people better, perhaps. So once I've got this information and this knowledge, what happens then? In my case, I prepare a weekly plan of regions to meditate and send balanced energy to, or to clear unbalanced energy from. I draw that up as a map, and I've tried a range of ways of drawing or preparing that over the years, and the one that I can keep going on a sustainable basis, given my limitations of health, energy and time and my other commitments in life, is just the basic map. There's a meditation technique that goes with this as well, but that's really a separate topic, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. There's a range of techniques that can be used, and what works best for each person is likely to be the most appropriate technique for that. This is an example of one of the weekly plans of meditation that I would put together. In this case, I build up a reserve of, or a battery of, lots of balanced or beneficial energy. This week it was in this region. Monday I would send that energy in a wave through like a weather system almost, through North America, then through this region, then through Europe and European Russia, through a lot of Asia, and then end on Friday around East Asia. That gives Saturday as a day off or a day to recover. This shows a few of the past examples of, or different techniques that I've tried. In this case, I was looking at each element: ether, fire, air, water, earth, and how much was balanced and how much was unbalanced for each region. In this case, I was looking at trying to get a bit more insight using runes. This is an example of doing an assessment for a smaller, more specific area, in this case West Asia. And this is something that I tried for a while, where I would draw up the area that was being worked on for each day, so that each day you could look at the map for that day and you would know which was the next bit to be worked on. All of these had their advantages. The main disadvantage for me was that they took a lot of effort, and I just couldn't keep that sustained effort going. Okay, so that covers most of what I do, how I got here, what I've tried in the past and so forth. Where to from here? Now, there's no compulsion with this. Basically, if this is of any interest, great. If you want to try it, that's fine. If you don't, and there are very valid reasons why people may not, and I'm going to mention a couple of them in particular. One is other life commitments. So for example, I mentioned that 20% of the weeks I haven't done a PWR, and that often includes things like caring for ill family members, tending to life events and so forth. People may have a different worldview, that's fine. If you would like to pursue this further, on my blog I have a page which has a few free courses, and one of them is a 27 lesson course on what I actually do, and then you can see the lesson plan there on the right, and by all means have a look at that. My experience is that psychic protection is important when doing this sort of work. It's important when doing any sort of psychic work or magic or ritual. But in this particular case, we are effectively, anyone doing this is effectively challenging those that are trying to cause harm in this world, and there's a slightly higher risk, therefore, that you may come to their attention and that you or your loved ones may come under some form of psychic attack. I haven't seen any of that attack be significant or major on anyone who's doing this, but it's something that still people considering it should be aware of. My experience is that normal psychic protection is generally enough. The only thing that I would suggest adding is using something like the undetectability bind room that I've shown on this slide. It's based on deflecting attention, not making yourself invisible, not trying to interfere with others. It's just if their attention comes your way, it'll just slide on by, basically. There's also Amy Blackthorne's book on protection is, in my opinion, excellent because it covers a wide range of techniques, psychic, herb, practical, physical matters, etc. So it gives a really good way of thinking about protection. And there are also some excellent books at Corellian Publishing. The other aspect about all this is that I've always hoped that somebody else would find this worthwhile enough to continue the work. In my wildest moments, I've often dreamed of or daydreamed of perhaps having a psychic weather channel on TV. More seriously, this work I was originally thinking could be done by a global network. More recently, I've had a look at how many people would be needed to do this more reliably than I have, given that I've only done 80% of the weeks. And you could probably get close to 100% coverage of a psychic weather report for every week if you had a half a dozen people doing the divination. That, however, means that they would have to be working at the sort of intensity that I have, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So I would like to see a group of, say, 25 to 30 diviners sharing the load, and perhaps 5 people analysing the divination results, 5 people doing the mapping and getting it up and out. So we're looking at groups of maybe 40 would be able to do this sort of work very comfortably. But whether it's a global network, a series of local groups, or a network of local groups, there would be some sort of need for, or I would suggest, some sort of communication, coordination and organisation. I don't have the energy or the lifespan left to take that on, so